أهلا بيكم في حلقة جديدة من PodBites، البودكاست اللي بنبسط فيه المواضيع الطبية المعقدة ونقسمها لحتت صغيرة وسهلة مناسبة للتنقل أو وقت القهوة أو لو جالكم فضول. أنا عمرو محمد and I'm joined today by my colleague Abdulrahman Farhat.
Hello, Amr. I hope you're pushing P because our topic today is 3Ps or the pentose phosphate pathway.
So Farhat, if out of the blue just someone came up to you in the hallway and asked you, what is this pentose phosphate pathway? What would you say to him?
So, to keep it simple, it is a side pathway of glycolysis that runs at the cytosol and mainly does two things. It makes NADPH and makes ribose 5-phosphate. No ATP is produced or consumed in this pathway.
So it's like the side quest for glycolysis. Glucose goes into glycolysis, but sometimes it takes the scenic route, just to be dramatic, through the pentose phosphate pathway to produce these special products.
Exactly. And the cell turns this pathway on, especially when there's plenty of glucose 6-phosphate, meaning there is enough glucose around and the cell can afford to use some of it for biosynthesis and antioxidant defense.
So you mean to say that these two products are very important for exam questions, correct?
Definitely. NADPH, this is not the same as NADH. NADH is more for ATP production, while NADPH is more for anabolic reactions and protection against oxidative stress.
So NADPH is mainly used in fatty acid synthesis and cholesterol synthesis, and used in the cytochrome P450 system, and most importantly for your exams, for reducing glutathione to protect against reactive oxygen species.
And don't forget, in the immune system, NADPH also powers the respiratory burst in phagocytes. It does this through an enzyme called NADPH oxidase, which uses NADPH to generate superoxide radicals inside neutrophils and macrophages to kill microbes. Those superoxide radicals are then handled by other enzymes we will be mentioning later.
And for the other product of the pentose phosphate pathway, which is the ribose 5-phosphate. The ribose 5-phosphate is used for nucleotide synthesis, which is basically the building blocks for DNA and RNA.
Alright, the pathway starts from glucose, which is converted to glucose 6-phosphate by hexokinase, same as glycolysis. From that, glucose 6-phosphate can either continue in glycolysis or go sideways into the pentose phosphate pathway.
And all of this happens in the cytosol, not in the mitochondria, because this is a very easy exam MCQ.
Yep, if I was an examiner, I would definitely include that one as a question. Again, it's important to remember there is no ATP directly made or used in this pathway, which is a nice thing to remember when you're trying to keep the pathway straight.
Now, structurally, the pathway has two phases, the oxidative phase and the non-oxidative phase. Can you walk us through them without making me want to sleep?
Abshir. The oxidative phase is irreversible. It takes glucose 6-phosphate and converts it eventually into ribulose 5-phosphate, generating NADPH along the way and releasing carbon dioxide. The non-oxidative phase is reversible. It shuffles carbons around to convert ribulose 5-phosphate into ribose 5-phosphate or back into glycolytic intermediates like fructose 6-phosphate and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate.
So, in short, the oxidative phase commits to making NADPH, and the non-oxidative phase is much more flexible to move between nucleotide synthesis and glycolysis.
Exactly. Think of the oxidative phase as a one-way street where you make NADPH, and the non-oxidative phase as a roundabout. You can go back into glycolysis or towards making nucleotides.
Okay, so Farahat, every pathway has that one enzyme that professors are obsessed with. In the pentose phosphate pathway, I think it is the glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase.
Spot on. G6PD catalyzes the first committed rate-limiting step of the pentose phosphate pathway, converting glucose 6-phosphate into 6-phosphogluconolactone and producing NADPH. Again, this step is irreversible.
So if students remember only one enzyme from today, I think it should be G6PD.
Oh, yeah. And clinically, G6PD deficiency is very high yield because without G6PD, you do not get enough NADPH in red blood cells. So, you cannot keep glutathione in its reduced form to handle oxidative stress.
And that would lead to hemolytic anemia. When red blood cells are exposed to oxidative stress, like certain drugs, certain infections, or even fava beans, Egyptians listening will appreciate the last one, that would lead to hemolytic anemia.
Now, let's zoom in on this oxidative stress angle even more, because that is often where the pathway suddenly feels clinically relevant.
Red blood cells rely on NADPH to regenerate reduced glutathione, which we refer to as GSH, from the oxidized form, which is GSSG. This happens using an enzyme called glutathione reductase. Reduced glutathione can then detoxify hydrogen peroxide through glutathione peroxidase, turning it into just simple water.
Whoa, this sounds like jibber jabber. Let's recap really quickly. NADPH reduces oxidized glutathione, which is GSSG, to reduced glutathione, which is GSH. GSH goes on and neutralizes hydrogen peroxide, which essentially protects the cell. So, if you lose NADPH, that whole system collapses and oxidative damage kills the red blood cells.
That is why in G6PD deficiency, hemolysis is triggered, especially when oxidative stress is increased.
And remember, earlier when we mentioned NADPH oxidase in phagocytes, let's connect the dots with two more enzymes students usually hear: superoxide dismutase and myeloperoxidase. Amr, tell me about them.
All right, in the neutrophils, NADPH oxidase uses NADPH to convert oxygen to superoxide. Then, superoxide dismutase converts that superoxide into hydrogen peroxide, or H2O2. After that, myeloperoxidase uses H2O2 and chloride, making hypochlorous acid, a very powerful microbe-killing bleach inside the phagolysosome.
Yep. And in phagocytes, again, NADPH from the pentose phosphate pathway is indirectly feeding this chain.
While in the red blood cells, NADPH is more about defense, keeping glutathione reduced and mopping up that same hydrogen peroxide so it does not damage the cell. The same molecule, but completely two different purposes depending on the cell type. Beside oxidative stress, where else is NADPH important?
All right, there are several anabolic pathways that you should remember, starting with fatty acid synthesis, which uses NADPH as a reducing agent in reactions catalyzed by fatty acid synthase. Second, we have cholesterol synthesis, especially the rate-limiting step, by HMG-CoA reductase, which again requires NADPH. Finally, the cytochrome P450 system uses NADPH via, you guessed it, cytochrome P450 reductase for drug metabolism.
So if you hear anabolic, building, or synthesis, think NADPH. And if you hear oxidative stress, free radicals, think also NADPH.
Subhanallah. Now, NADPH is like the generous friend who always pays the bills with electrons.
Coming back to the non-oxidative phase for a moment, you mentioned that it connects back to glycolysis. How does that help the cell practically?
All right, the non-oxidative reactions can convert ribose 5-phosphate into fructose 6-phosphate and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, as we previously mentioned, using enzymes like transketolase, which requires what? Vitamin B1 as a cofactor. These products can then re-enter glycolysis.
So, if the cell does not need more nucleotides, it does not waste the carbons. It sends them back to energy metabolism.
Exactly. And because these reactions are reversible, the cells can also run them through the other way, from glycolytic intermediates to ribose 5-phosphate when it needs nucleotides, but not necessarily a lot of NADPH.
So, let's anchor everything with the classic clinical correlation, G6PD deficiency.
Alright. In G6PD deficiency, the rate-limiting enzyme of the pentose phosphate pathway is deficient, so less NADPH is produced in red blood cells. Without NADPH, glutathione cannot stay in its reduced form, and the cell cannot detoxify reactive oxygen species.
When oxidative stress increases, for example, due to infections or using certain drugs or even foods like fava beans, this will lead to hemolytic anemia.
This is why this biochemistry pathway shows up in hematology and pharmacology later. It's not just abstract chemistry, it explains real clinical problems.
Before we wrap up, let's do a rapid fire recap for the students who are maybe listening on 2x speed on their way to the exam.
Go for it.
So, what is the location for the pentose phosphate pathway?
The cytosol.
And what are the two main products of this pathway?
You guessed it, NADPH and ribose 5-phosphate.
And what exactly are the functions of NADPH?
NADPH is important when it comes to antioxidant defense via glutathione, fatty acid synthesis, cholesterol synthesis, cytochrome P450, and oxidative burst in phagocytes.
And what is the key enzyme for the pentose phosphate pathway?
You guys should know this. G6PD. We said it's the rate-limiting enzyme. It produces NADPH, and a deficiency in it would cause hemolytic anemia under oxidative stress.
Also, no ATP is used or produced in this pathway.
And remember, the oxidative phase is irreversible, which makes NADPH. The non-oxidative phase is reversible, and it connects to glycolysis and nucleotide synthesis.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Good luck, especially if you're revising a night before your biochem exam.
If you found this helpful, share it with a friend who still confuses NADH with NADPH.
Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, keep your NADPH high and your oxidative stress low. And keep learning, one bite at a time.
Essentially, yeah. NADPH. This is
مو
not
essentially. كيف essentially?
essentially, yeah. Okay.
The ribose 5.
5. مستحيل. How did you know?
يا سيء يا سيء. اسألك بالله.
طب ايش رايك لما تيجي تقطعني المره الجايه تخليني اكملها للاخر بعدين تقطعني؟
يا حبيبي انت قلتها غلط. ما هي turning it into water. ممكن تقول انه
That sounded like a lot. NADPH.
قول that sounded like جبر جابر. انه كذا.
جبر جابر.
إن يعني كلام فاضي يعني.
جبر جابر.
أيوة.
Is this something English?
It is يا حبيبي. Just because I looked up pushing P does not mean I don't know how to speak English.
Right.
I'm a very good speaker. That's not true.
Whoa. Okay, طيب.
بس هي مو enemy. بالعكس هي our friend بس
Enemy.
goes rogue. أيوة. بيعمل انقلاب. For the students who are maybe listening or maybe doom scrolling on TikTok. لا بس لا, that doesn't make sense. Let's do a rapid fire recap for the students who are maybe listening or just playing Ultimate Team. انه يعني فاتحين البودكاست انه they're opening كذا just for the هذا بس they're playing on the
قول
PlayStation.
مثلا or watching Egypt in
لا وفر.
Oh no, we lost.
لا because هي شوف you have to be playing, you can't be watching something. ايوه خلاص حقولها انه بس بطل تخبط يا حبيبي. For the students out there who are playing the episode on speaker while competing in Ultimate Team, let's do a fire recap.
Stop. ما في حاجة اسمها playing the episode on speaker.
إلا ماشي طيب. Who are listening while playing FIFA Ultimate Team. يجي. أيوة. Okay. And keep learning one bite at a time.
Woo!
استنى أخلص طيب يا حبيبي قطعتها.